The AOC 24G2 has been one of our most recommended 1080p 144Hz monitors, but sometime last year AOC quietly swapped out the panel for an allegedly inferior one without telling anyone or changing the name. That sounds pretty dodgy to me, but is this new variant actually worse? Let's get benchmarking. Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. It's time for a monitor investigation, and this one seriously piqued my interest a few months ago when I watched a video from YouTube channel Techless. I'll link the video below for anyone that's interested, but basically the gist of it was that AOC quietly changed the panel on their highly popular 24G2 1080p 144Hz IPS monitor, a product we'd raved about in our initial review and had been recommending since. The new panel was supposedly different in several ways, including lower brightness and a worse contrast ratio, suggesting that AOC had done something dodgy here. We'd actually heard similar reports around the same time from some of our Discord members, and you too can join our Discord if you sign up to our Patreon or Floatplane pages. One guy in particular was getting terrible results using our ICC profile for the 24G2 and wasn't getting close to the numbers we showed in our review. Immediately, I was quite concerned because often when a company decides to change a major component in their product without telling anyone and without changing the name, it's for dodgy reasons. For example, they might want to capitalize on good feedback with an early bunch of units before swapping out that hardware for cheaper, crappier internals and cashing in on the hype. The last thing I want to is be recommending a product only for viewers to get a totally different experience when they buy that same thing. So it's time to go on a mission to test the new variant of the 24G2 and comprehensively compare it to the old version. For that, I bought a 24G2 at retail using funds from our supporters, big thanks to anyone that contributes to us directly. I wasn't 100% sure whether I'd be getting the new version when I bought it, but lo and behold it arrived, and indeed it's the new model with a totally different display panel. How can you check which variant you have or are getting? Well, there's two ways to do so. One is to access the 24G2 service menu. Unplug the monitor while it's on, plug it back in while holding down the menu button, release the button and then re-enter the menu. You can then navigate to the F icon and in there you'll spot the panel. Rather than reading out the long panel names, I'll put some information on the screen that shows you which panel corresponds to which variant, but basically if it says FHBNG0, it's the new model. It's also likely to have a more recent manufacturing date in 2020, whereas my old model had a 2019 date. The second method was discovered by Techless during his research and allows you to check before buying the display and turning it on. It involves looking at the serial number and EAC on the box with a different prefix indicating a different model. While the service menu suggests that both panels are quite similar, both are TPV TPM238WF1 models, actually they are quite different. The initial variant with no FHB suffix is a Panda panel, while the newer variant uses a BOE panel. The listed panel name from TPV is their internal code for that panel assembly, with TPV being the company that owns AOC and makes their monitors. To make matters more complicated, BOE recently bought some of Panda's LCD fabs in China, so the two manufacturers are now closely related. Anyway, the point is that despite the names, fundamentally these panels are different, and it's not just a simple revision of the same model. Luckily from the outside, both variants of the 24G2 are identical, so everything I said in my initial review still applies here. It also means I can save some time on B-roll, which is nice. Anyway, if you want my full thoughts on the design and build quality, you can check out my original review. The main question that was on my mind when testing these two monitors was, has response time performance changed? And in particular, have response times gotten worse switching from a Panda to BOE panel? Let's find out. Firstly, I'm going to skip right to the chase and show this monitor's best response time mode, strong, and just go through our usual charts to see how this monitor performs. At 144Hz, performance is very solid, and with a 6.5 millisecond response time average with no overshoot, this is good enough for a true 144Hz experience. None of these transitions are particularly slow or problematic, which is good to see. The performance is also held quite well throughout the refresh range. Response times remain on average around 6.5 milliseconds right through to 60 Hz, and overshoot at no stage increases to an unusable level. Cumulative deviation, which measures how close the response is to the ideal instant response, does increase slightly, but never to the point where this overdrive setting is not suitable. This is actually very good performance for a 144Hz IPS panel, especially down near 60 Hz. But is the new model performing as well as the old model? Actually, for the most part, the new 2020 variant of the 24G2 delivers noticeably superior performance to the old model. Looking at peak greater grey performance at 144Hz, the 2020 model delivers a 26% faster average response time, which does deliver better motion clarity. This pushes the display from being a mid to low end competitor to more solidly in the middle of these charts, competing well with other IPS offerings. Average performance across the refresh range is also improved, although not to quite the same extent as with peak performance. The 2020 variant is 11% faster here, but does so with a lot lower inverse ghosting. While you might have noticed some inverse ghosting with the 2019 model, it's not really present at all with the new model. The newer model also does a much better job of delivering a single overdrive mode experience, with solid performance all the way down to 60Hz. With the old model, performance drops off quite a bit at 60Hz and causes this high inverse ghosting rate, and ultimately I wouldn't class the old model as delivering a solid single overdrive setting. This is reflected in average cumulative deviation. If you want more information on cumulative deviation, check our video talking about our new display test suite for 2021. Basically, in this metric, the new model is substantially better, 33% better on average across the refresh range. The Panda panel used in the old model was delivering a last generation IPS experience, whereas the newer BOE panel is much more in line with modern higher end IPS panels in terms of the balance between response times and overshoot. There is no doubting the newer model delivers a better motion experience. At a fixed 120Hz, the 2020 model is slightly better, offering 10% better response times with a similar level of overshoot. However, at 60Hz, the newer variant is a lot better, 43% faster with a negligible increase to overshoot. This really highlights the primary difference between the models. The new 24G2 is a little faster at the top end, but holds that performance much better at lower refresh rates, so in general delivers the better experience. I also recorded lower input latency with the 2020 model, helping to somewhat reduce total input lag. This leads to a good gaming experience for a 144Hz panel, although ultimately for the best low latency performance you will need a higher refresh rate display. What's also clear from our performance testing is that the new 24G2 is using a less efficient panel. Power consumption is 31% higher. The old 24G2 was exceptionally efficient for a 24-inch 1080p monitor, whereas the new model is less so, but not outstandingly bad or anything. While response time performance is generally better on the new 24G2 model, the same is not true of color performance. In fact, most areas of color performance have regressed, so let's take a look at the impact. First up, we have default out-of-the-box color calibration in grayscale. The new 24G2 is not accurate out of the box at all, with several problems. Average CCT is too high at 7392K, leading the display to have a blue tint from the factory. Combined with a less than ideal gamma curve, this led to a high delta E average and general performance that just looks wrong. If we look back at default performance on the 24G2 from 2019, factory calibration here was actually very strong. The CCT curve was much closer to accurate, and the gamma curve much flatter, leading to a far better out-of-the-box experience. It's possible that when switching panels, AOC used their old calibration information without updating it for the characteristics of the new model. Both the new and old variants are wide gamut monitors with no significant difference to P3 coverage, about 88% in both cases. Although again, default sRGB performance on the old 24G2 model is better, mostly due to superior grayscale performance. In both situations, you get some level of oversaturation though, and neither model includes a good sRGB emulation mode. Ultimately though, accuracy isn't that significant of an issue in the long run, as you can calibrate both displays to deliver essentially the same performance. With the same use of IPS technology and the same color gamut, if you do calibrate the newer model, you aren't missing out. ICC profiles for both are available for our Patreon and Floatplane members. Early reports suggesting the new 24G2 features inferior brightness and contrast are true. The new model features bad peak brightness, below 300 nits, so about a 100 nit reduction in brightness. This could matter to you if you were viewing the display in a particularly bright room or one with lots of backlighting. However, in either case, I do expect most people to turn down the brightness to a more pleasant level in the 100 to 200 nit range. The biggest reduction in terms of color performance is the contrast ratio. The 2019 model with the Panda panel achieved excellent contrast for an IPS at 1455:1. The new 2020 model isn't bad by any means for IPS monitors, however contrast has regressed to just 1000:1, which is more typical for an IPS display. That's quite a large drop, so if you often use your monitor in a dark environment, the raised black levels of the newer model may be worse for you. I also recorded worse display uniformity with the new model. While the center section still remains quite even, there is fall off around the edges. In contrast, the old 24G2 had exceptional uniformity, at least my unit did. There is always going to be some variance between models, however I'd say that it's unlikely the discrepancy here could be just down to variance. I'd say the newer panel is less uniform. When I bought a second 24G2 a couple of weeks ago to test for this video, I was pretty sure I was going to find something dodgy going on. After all, initial reports from users and a few other reviewers pointed to the panel being downgraded, which would make this display much harder to recommend. But after thoroughly assessing what the old and new variants offer, I was pleasantly surprised to find AOC has instead merely side-graded the panel. This does make it worse in some areas, but quite a lot better in others. As a gaming monitor, first and foremost, I was happy to find that response performance has improved across the board. Not only is the monitor faster at 144Hz, it's also now delivering a single overdrive mode experience, with much better performance at lower refresh rates. Given response times are in the region of 20 to 30% faster at times, I'd say the newer 24G2 actually delivers a generation better performance from the BOE IPS panel, more in line with today's mid-range to high-end monitors, albeit at a lower resolution and refresh rate. For a display that still retails with an MSRP of $180 although it can be hard to find in today's hardware climate, this is genuinely quite impressive. Performance in this area is now as good as the BenQ EX2510, which surpassed the old 24G2 midway through last year, but at a lower price point. I just don't see the value in the BenQ option anymore, given it costs $250. The trade-off here is in some areas to color performance. Both models are still wide gamut with the same P3 coverage, but the new 24G2 has poor brightness and a much lower contrast ratio compared to the older model. It also comes with far worse factory calibration and inferior uniformity while consuming more power. This may sound bad upon first glance, but when you look a bit deeper, I don't think it's all that problematic. The original 24G2 had much better than average contrast, calibration, and uniformity for an entry-level IPS display, so this newer model is more reverting to the mean. It's certainly no worse than competing options, which offer similar contrast ratios and at times don't even offer wide color gamuts. It's also possible to calibrate both the old and new models to virtually identical levels of accuracy, as the display technology used here is similar. Of course, some people may have specifically bought the 24G2 for its higher than average contrast and solid factory calibration, in which case this new model won't be as good. The brightness drop is also disappointing and perhaps the biggest lingering problem. Unfortunately, if you do want the older model for whatever reason, it may be hard to find out as it does look like it's being phased out in favour of this new variant. It also remains unclear why AOC decided to update the 24G2 while having the monitor retain the same name. I'm sure there is some reason for the panel swap. For example, the Panda variant could have suddenly increased in price or was discontinued, but surely changing the most crucial component is grounds for a new name. Something as simple as 24G3 would have differentiated this model from the old model and would have allowed AOC to market the new variant's improved response performance. Anyway, that's it for our assessment of the 24G2 comparing the old and new variants. I will be linking this video on the old monitor review that I did back in whenever that was from the 2019 variant. So yeah, you will be able to get this from either page, and hopefully that will provide enough information for you guys to make the best buying decisions that you can around 1080p monitors, because considering this is quite a popular monitor, and I think I would probably recommend it at the moment given I've now tested the new variants. If you do want to support our monitor testing, you can do so via our Patreon and Floatplane accounts. Links to those are in the description. You'll get access to our ICC profiles, Discord chat if you want to ask questions, talk with other people about all sorts of tech related stuff and so on. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.